Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today's video is going to be a second look at the Affliction Warlock, which has gotten a lot of changes since my first video. Again, this is not a guide, it's just me showing you what the changes are and giving my impressions on them. The best way to find out what works for you is to actually just go and test it out. And you can do that on the PTR right now. So let's take a look at the abilities. Pretty much everything in the abilities has stayed the same. As you can tell, I'm on a copied character, not a pre-made character, and I'm level 115, so horse damage and stuff like that's not going to necessarily be the same. But one thing that did see a bit of a nerf is Drain Life. Drain Life now heals for 500% of the damage done instead of 600%. But this isn't where the big changes came. The big changes have really come in the form of talents, so let's look at those. So, as you can tell in the tier 15 row, Shadow, Embrace, and Haunt were moved down to the 90 tier to go with Grimoire of Sacrifice. That makes almost no sense to me whatsoever, but it is what it is. Deathbolt also got a bit of a nerf. As you can see here, it now does 30% of the total remaining damage of your dots on the target instead of 40%. It is on a 30-second cooldown now instead of 25-second cooldown, but on the plus side, it no longer has a cast in its instant cast. So, yeah, that's pretty good, I guess, but still a little bit of a nerf. Also, Nightfall was removed from this tier, and Drain Soul, or Nightfall was moved to this tier, I should say, and Drain Soul has made a return, and it replaces Shadow Bolt. It's a little bit different than what we're actually used to seeing. It's basically got no healing effect, and it's more of for an execute phase. It has the old school 100% damage increase against enemies below 20% health. Generates 1 soul shard if the target dies during this effect. So, yeah, it's kind of good, a little bit different, but mainly for the people who didn't like the idea of having Shadow Bolt back, and they like the Drain style of play. So there's that. So let's move on down to the next tier, which is the 30 tier. This one's got a bit of a change too. Siphon Life was added to this tier from lower tier, and Death's Embrace was completely removed. Death's Embrace, again, was an ability that basically your dots did more damage in an execute phase. So I guess you can kind of say that effect was sort of baked in with Drain Soul, but yeah, this now you have to choose between an easier build of, having a, your agony ramp up higher, so there's less, it doesn't have to be paid as much attention to, having Absolute Corruption, which is great. It's just permanently on there and you don't have to worry about it. Or Siphon Life, which gives you actually it gives you some healing back, and it's another dot, and it's more damage, and it's one more thing ticking on the target. I think this is probably going to be the build with it's probably going to be the one that does more damage, but it's going to also be the tougher build to manage with more dots to make sure you're keeping up for for your various rotational burst and maintenance kind of damage. So yeah, the next row is pretty much unchanged. It's the same as it is. 60 tier has now gotten a little bit of a change. One talent particular that's been added is Vile Taint. I love that name, by the way. You can take it in so many different wrong and horrible directions, but yeah, that's kind of how my brain works. But anyway, it's been added to this section, and Soul Harvest has been completely removed from the game. I think the way they had nerfed it down so much, it wasn't really very good anyway, unless you were, you could keep it up. The whole point to it is that targets with your agony would increase the duration of it, so that's why it kind of had an AoE component, but it really wasn't that great. Anyway, Vile Taint's pretty good. It's definitely an AoE, along with everything else in this talent row. It costs a soul shard. It's got a 1.3 second cast on a 20-second cooldown. Does some pretty good damage over time. Looks like 5,075 damage over 10 seconds to all enemies within 10 yards. And it has a movement speed reduction. So pretty good, I would say. This next talent row doesn't really mean anything. All these abilities are kind of inconsequential. I like Demonic Circle, and it's probably going to be the go-to one for PvE content. Then we go to the 90 tier, where you have Shadow, Embrace, and Haunt. I think Grimoire of Sacrifice is still ridiculous, and it's I don't know why it's even in the game. You want to get rid of your pet to have the possibility to do less damage every once in a while. It makes no sense. But that's an uphill battle for another day. I've been playing around with Shadow Bolt or Shadow Embrace and Haunt, and Shadow Embrace, basically you can stack up to 3 times and have a 9% rolling debuff on your target where you'll do more damage. But this is one of those where I was talking about where there's a low margin for error. Well, I guess I should say a high margin for error. If you miss and this drops off, you're going to have to take 3 globals to get it back on. Versus Haunt, which if you let it fall off, I mean it's on a 15-second cooldown and it lasts for 15 seconds. So there's probably going to be a cooldown where it's for 1 second, no matter what, where you won't have it. But it's a little bit more forgiving. So if you do miss it and you have a couple seconds off, you'll instantly be back up to 10 seconds, as opposed to Shadow Embrace, where you've got to kind of work in your Shadow Bolts to get it back up. So I think Haunt is probably going to be better, and plus it does damage initially, as opposed to Shadow Embrace, which is just off of your Shadow Bolt, and it doesn't really have any other interaction with that. So at first I thought this was going to be easier just because it's going to be part of your rotation, but if you get into your rotation where you're spamming a bunch of other things, or you've got too many things to keep track of, too many spinning plates, it's easy for this ability to fall off. And then it's more difficult to get it back up, and then it doesn't do as much damage as, or buff your damage as much as Haunt does. So let's move on down. As you'll see here, I have the legendary ring, so I have 2 talents on this tier, but this last tier is going to be a choice of play style, realistically. Soul Conduit and Creeping Death are pretty much the same as they were, but the new talent we have now is Dark Soul Misery. Infuses your soul with misery, fallen foes, increasing your haste by 30% for 20 seconds on a 2-minute cooldown. That's a pretty good buff right there, and it's one more thing to kind of give a little bit of flavor back to the spell. I did want to mention that one of the big things that's different from the last build that I didn't mention before is Summon Dark Glare. I think I mentioned this in a previous video, but one of the ones that was after my initial Affliction Warlock video. But now each Warlock spec has its own signature demon. And for the Affliction Warlock, it's going to be the Summon Dark Glare. Summons a Dark Glare from the Twisting Nether that extends the duration of your damage over time effects of all enemies by 8 seconds. This has actually gotten kind of a bit of a nerf. This is kind of one of the reasons why Affliction doesn't feel as powerful as it did previously, but this previously was a 15-second extension of your dots, and it felt very powerful. It's on a 3-minute cooldown. The Dark Glare will serve you for 20 seconds, blasting its target for 1,012 shadow damage, increased by 10% for every damage over time effect you have on the target. It's a good cooldown, but it's not as powerful as it once was. But it's just one more thing that's been added to the toolkit of the Affliction Warlock. But let's look into PvP talents, because these had not been implemented at the time of my last video. So this first set of talents here, these are all your just ability to escape CC. These are pretty much the same for every spec of every class. You'll have these 3 abilities. You'll have a choice. I like Adaptation. It's passive, and yeah, it's less to think about. Next, we'll have Affliction Warlock, as well as all the Warlock specs have curses now as part of PvP. You've got one that increases spell casting time. You've got one that reduces physical damage. You've got Curse of Fragility, which reduces maximum health. And we also have Curse of Shadows. Magical damage over time effects will strike the target an additional time for 20% of their damage as shadows. So that's pretty good for PvP talent. Also, let's see here, we also have Raw and Decay. Each time your Drain life deals damage, it increases the duration of your Unstable Affliction, Corruption, and Agony on the targets by 1 second. I guess this could be good if you're in PvP and Drain life is an ability you use. I don't really know. I'm not really big into PvP. And by not really big into PvP, I mean I suck at PvP, and I'm that guy that people look for to kill instantly to up their honor. Moving on, though, Nether Ward is another more of a defensive ability, and this is one that's for all warlocks. It surrounds the caster with a shield, lasts 3 seconds, reflects all harmful spells cast on you. Good defensive on a 45-second cooldown. Acid Strain, whenever you heal yourself with Drain Life, the enemy target deals 5% reduced damage to you for 6 seconds. Stacks up to 5 times. Could be great. I'm, just not really up with PvP. Don't see how that would have a lot of play in just you're having it out for doing world combat. A lot of these abilities that I choose, I'm not really looking to go out in PvP against people out in the world. I have war mode on because it's going to make me level faster, and it gives me access to these PvP talents. And a lot of these PvP talents can help you do stuff, that's going to help you kill stuff faster out in the world, like while questing. So, but yeah, let's see what else we've got. Casting Circle summons a casting circle for 8 seconds. While within it, you are immune to silence and interrupt effects. Learning Casting Circle causes unending resolve to no longer grant immunity to these. I don't get the trade-off. I don't see that as being worth it as much. Next is Endless Affliction. Your unstable affliction deals the same damage as normal, but its duration is increased by 6 seconds. This can be helpful for keeping up a rotation that's less complicated, because your affliction will stay, unstable affliction will stay up longer, so you don't have to worry about refreshing it as much. So that's pretty nice. Then we have Soul Shatter. This is not like the Soul Shatter of old, which would drop your threat, which I wish we had, because some Warlock specs have a tendency to really get a lot of threat really quickly, and with tank threat reduction being a problem, that would be helpful, but it is what it is. This one consumes all of your damage over time effects on the 5 nearest enemies within 40 yards, dealing up to 10% of their maximum health in shadow damage. For each enemy hit by Soul Shatter, you gain 1 Soul Shard and 10% haste for 8 seconds. That's pretty freaking good. I like that one, and that's the one that I choose for. It's on a 1-minute cooldown. But yeah, that's going to do it for that. One thing I wanted to touch on was that I haven't really talked about as much is Azerite gear. So yeah, Azerite gear kind of changes things up. I know a lot of people in other videos that I've looked at, people say, yeah, Azerite gear could be the answer, since they're getting rid of legendaries. We don't have artifact weapons. We don't have, any of those artifact traits. We don't have, and we're not going to have tiers. So Azerite gear has to be it. Pretty much Azerite gear is going to come on your head, shoulders, and chest. Some of these abilities on Azerite gear are passive, and you can, if you really wanted to, you can choose abilities where you can just have this general thing that won't really affect your playstyle, and you can use the same Azerite gear for all 3 specs. It's probably not going to be as powerful, but some of the ones on here are pretty good. On this helm piece that I have, it kind of changes the way Unstable Affliction works. Causes it to deal 76 additional damage, and casting it reduces the cooldown of Summon Dark Lair by 3 seconds. Not too shabby, right? Let me go on to the shoulder piece here. Casting Unstable Affliction on a target affected by your Unstable Affliction increases your haste by 184 for 15 seconds. So pretty much it's incentivizing you to make sure that you are casting. You are always keeping an unstable affliction on a target, and you're always casting it when you have an unstable affliction on a target. The effect will last longer than the unstable affliction, though. I don't really go over these second ones because usually they're just passive. They'll heal you when you kill stuff. They'll heal you when you take damage. They'll reduce damage you take, that sort of thing. And the last one just increases the item level. But on the chest piece, I went with a more passive ability. This one says, your spells and abilities have a chance to increase secondary stats by 13 for 1 minute, stacking up to 4 times. It's pretty good. It's one of those general type of abilities. The other thing was every other soul shard your agony generates also increases your intellect by 191 for 6 seconds. I thought that one could be good, but I like this one here. It's pretty easy. Yeah, but and generally, like I said before, you can change whenever you want. It's just going to cost you some gold, and every time you do a change, the cost doubles, regardless of whether you're changing a helm or you're changing your shoulders or your chest piece. The cost will double. So I changed this one, it's 100 gold, right, or something like that. When I go to change this one, it's going to be 200 gold. And then when I go to change this one, it's going to be 400 gold. I haven't quite figured out what the cap is yet, but you know, I'll just run over there real quick and let you see, because I've been changing this as I've been testing out all the different specs, and I'm keeping it to where I have the best Azurite talents, I guess if you want to call them that, for each spec when I'm testing out that spec. So you can come over here. I'm in Borealis. I'm in the Trade Winds market. This little section over here, there's a guy here, Razi the Shaper. You can put your Azurite in there. You want to reforge it. I don't understand why they call it reforging, but look at that cost. It's 1280. There needs to be a cap on this, preferably under 1,000,000 gold. I'm just saying, you know, I think this should be one of those things where it's capped at like 1,000 gold. I know gold's a little bit easier to come by these days. I mean, this is character. I've transferred some gold from characters that I've deleted that I played a little bit on the beta, but this is kind of ridiculous to cost that much gold to do a reforge. I get that they want you to keep the stuff the same, or maybe they want you to have, you know, a set for each spec you're playing, but yeah, I think that definitely needs to have a cap. So my final thoughts on Affliction are a little bit mixed. There's a lot of different builds you can do to suit your particular playstyle. It looks like the spec that will probably do the most DPS is going to be one that is the most difficult to play. If you aren't skilled and able to keep track of not only different abilities and cooldowns, but also your dots, you may struggle with this type of build. On the other hand, if you want a build that is going to be simple, your DPS will probably suffer, and you may take, you know, you may get bored with it. You may just get tired of refreshing 2 dots and casting, you know, 2 or 3 spells. It's a give and take. There are like hybrid ones, but again, your DPS is not going to be maximized by doing that. It seems to me, this is just my opinion from what I've been seeing, is that the more complicated your spec is, the more DPS you'll do. But then again, if you mess up, if you screw up and do like I've done on a number of occasions and hit Death Bolt before you hit Summon Dark Glare, or completely forget Dark Soul Misery because, you know, there's so many things you're trying to keep track of, or you let Haunt fall off the target, or while you're trying to keep Unstable Affliction up, you forget to refresh, you know, Corruption or Siphon Life, your DPS is gonna suffer. So again, a lot of a high margin for error, but also a high success. So a lot of risk, a lot of reward kind of thing if you're really on it. But yeah, Affliction's different. It's changed so much. It's going to be one of those specs that's going to take some time getting used to. I foresee this being very good at single target and on longer boss fights. Ramp up's still going to be an issue with Affliction, but it doesn't seem to be as bad as it once was. And I think having stuff like Haunt or Shadow Embrace to be able to, you know, get your damage, or having the Creeping Death talent, it's going to make it so you have less ramp up time. And you know, there's different ways you can do it, but again, lots of changes. It's going to take some time to get used to. So yeah, that's going to do it for me. What did you like or dislike about the changes to Affliction? Is this a spec you want to main? Let me know in the comment section below. If you want to see more videos like this one, please subscribe and hit the bell icon. I mean, no one can really say for certain that it will mean anything, but hey, why not? If you like this channel, hit that like button like you want to hit something, I don't know, hit targets harder. I'm coming at a loss for things to do for this outro, but I want to make this my thing. If you think I should abandon this, please let me know in the comment section, and I'll see you next time.